If I asked you to picture in your mind what you think a church is, what is it you think would pop in there? I'm sure some of you will be thinking a modern day building with all the features we need. Many of us will think of the old traditional buildings. And in those, what is it that we think of that makes it a church? Oftentimes we'll see the steeple rising up to the skies, perhaps a bell tower. Obviously, doors for people to come in and out of. But outside the church, many of us still picture the cemetery, that final resting place for loved ones, for friends and family. In some cases, the cemetery is part of what makes this building a church, that final place. We often look around and see churches, and for many of the cases, a traditional building, a building that contains traditions. It's all about traditions. Most of what Christianity is our tradition, that what we've learned from the past and carry on doing today. And you might ask, where did this all start? Well, looking at the scriptures, we can see a story in the book of Genesis. After the death of his wife, Abraham goes and looks for a place to put her body. Eventually he decides upon a cave and seeks to purchase the land from the owner. Sometimes we concentrate on why it is that Abraham doesn't want to take the generosity of the gift of that land. Sometimes we forget that what Abraham is doing is buying and creating a cemetery. Initially, it's only going to be populated with his wife, Sarah. But in a few years, Abraham himself will also be put there to lay to rest. In the book of Genesis, this place is described as a burial ground. In other words, a cemetery. And in the scriptures, it is the first time we see a dedicated place for people to lay their remains. After Abraham and Sarah are laid to rest here, we also find Isaac coming and being put there as well. After Isaac, Rebekah, and then Jacob, and followed by many others. And while Abraham may have chosen this specific cave, known as the Cave of Machpelah, it's still there today, and others know it as the Cave of the Patriarchs or the Tomb of the Patriarchs. The actual caves may not be generally accessible by the public today. Many still travel there to pay respects and to take part, to be in the place where history happened, where the people that they read about in scriptures have found their rest. This cave is now a religious site, and it's important for Christian, Jewish, even Islamic believers who faithfully traveled, who take part in the presence. For many people, the church is a central part of their life. From the first day, shortly after they're born, baptized in the sacraments within the sanctuary. Throughout their days, given pastoral care, teaching and guidance, led in the ways of God. And when the time to come close to God is near, those final moments of pastoral care as you prepare for their next journey. And when they're gone, laid to rest in a cemetery such as this. For a great number of people, the church is there for every major step of their lives. And who better to look after the people who seek God than the church itself? And who better to look after us after we've departed than the church that we've come to know and love? In his novel, The Big U, Neil Stephenson writes that universities are a great place to put treasured and valuable things. As he writes about them, the universities have survived political change, wars, turmoil, and have endured. I think even more so the universities, the church itself plays a part in our history, just like the schools do. Churches, especially Christian churches, have been around since the 3rd century and still exist and are inhabited and used on a regular basis. Well, not every church has this much time on earth. We do have that anticipation that churches are enduring. These cemeteries provide a place for people, friends, family, co-workers, colleagues to come and pay respects. But the enduring nature of these stones which mark the graves are a lasting testament that each of these people existed. It provides us now and those in the future a way to make a connection to those of our past. Look at the tomb of Elvis Presley. Each year it's recorded that over 500,000 visitors come just to see his tomb. Well, the people here are probably not nearly as famous and likewise don't receive nearly as many visitors. They're still here to provide a place for respects, a place for thinking and pondering and reflecting upon those who came before us. And in places such as this, the tender care provided to these sites of memorial, cared for by the church and the people that are there within, seeing to the dignity that each person deserves, both in life and afterlife. I mentioned just a few moments ago how churches have, in many people's view, a longevity. The church seems to always be there. And there's an anticipation that the church will always be there. Well, it would be nice to believe that is true. In reality, we know that it's quite different. A report published by the United Church of Canada in 2018 listed just over 2,700 churches in operation across the country. Now, obviously not all these churches will have their own cemetery, but imagine that some of them do, and we can expect that a great number do in fact have cemeteries. If only 10% of those churches have their own cemetery, that's nearly 300 cemeteries operated by this denomination alone. In 2019, CBC News published an article and hinted that 9,000 churches would close their doors forever in the next 10 coming years. This report obviously is covering those churches in Ontario alone, and not all those churches are United Churches of Canada, but a good number of them will be. Some people might ask, if we can't trust that the churches will be there forever, then is it a mistake to trust those remains of our loved ones to be there and cared for in the way that we want forever? When a church closes, sometimes these cemeteries will be turned over to the province or to regional authorities who will care for the grounds, mowing the lawns, weeding, ensuring that dignity and respect are maintained. In the case of the United Church, some of these cemeteries will be taken over by the United Church itself. While the individual congregation in the church building may close, the United Church of Canada as a body carries on. And with it comes some responsibility to care for these loved ones which have been placed in our care. Here in these grounds, we are currently at the site of the former Atlantic United Church of Canada. It opened in 1866 as a Presbyterian denomination, and sometime after that joined in union with other denominations as part of the formation of the United Church of Canada. However, in 2016, this church closed its doors to the congregation for its last time. It didn't disappear, it became amalgamated with Trillium United Church in Mono Mills, along with 3 other congregations. But the building in these grounds went to the local historical society, who now cares for the building. Former members of Atlantic United Church, who are now members of Trillium, still have loved ones that are here in a cemetery that is no longer their own churches. Benjamin Franklin once said that in this world, nothing can be certain except for death and taxes. While accountants may, with clever skill, get you out of taxes in some cases if you're lucky. And even though science has been trying for some time to avoid that end for all, we found no way to escape from death. And it's in places like these that we can all expect to reside at some point in our futures. The church, more specifically any individual church, isn't guaranteed to be here forever. More and more we hear of churches that are closing for one reason or another. And so the longevity is uncertain. And the questions remain, why do we put cemeteries with churches? Well, in fact, that's not always the case. More and more, especially in urban areas where land is expensive and difficult to obtain, and the costs associated with maintaining a cemetery, and the long-term designs for these properties, where once they become a cemetery, is difficult to make them of use for any other purpose. More and more churches are being created without cemetery grounds to call their own. And so, are these cemeteries of the church needed? Should we start moving away from these lands into public or private enterprise for the burial of our loved ones? Perhaps, but we also know that the church does more than just provide physical space for coffins to be put in the ground, for boxes of ashes to be placed under the earth, for stone markers to be placed, or places to sit and reflect. Throughout our lives, the church provided pastoral care, and leading up to that final conclusion of life, the church provides pastoral care for each individual that seeks its need. Afterwards, the church plays a part in providing that same care to loved ones in their grieving process and the sadness, the celebration of life. Across this world, there are an untold number of graves that nobody remembers, long forgotten to history. In some cases, these might be cemeteries like this that have been abandoned and forgotten. Others, they may be small sites where a family or an individual was buried. And after family lines have thinned and become nothing, after friends and colleagues have vanished and disappeared, in some cases, long after the stones themselves have given in to the elements, decayed or worn away from wind and rain and snow, where once stood wooden crosses, now taking their toll from moss and decay, return to the earth themselves. Who remembers these people? I think that's one important thing that we need to look for in the church in deciding whether or not cemeteries need to be part of our sanctuaries. For many people, the greatest thing that the church does after death is to remember. Records are kept for years and years, if not for an eternity. The stones are maintained, the grounds taken care of. And that memory of who is here, who came before us, the families, the love, it's all kept for us to find later. For those who have gone, these cemeteries become a final resting place for what's been left behind. For those who remain, it's a place for reflection, for thinking, for remembering. For the churches, it's a call to care for us while we are still here, and for our families that remain.